Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has etched yet another loss in the culture war. Although it is a partial loss, let me explain. A recent court settlement now allows teachers to say gay again in the classroom, as long as it's not part of the official class instruction. So there's where the caveat comes into play. Now, this is all under the terms of a new settlement reached on Monday between Florida education officials and civil rights attorneys who had challenged the Parental Rights in Education Act, also known as the Don't Say Gay bill, because of how vague and far and wide-reaching that it was. That law ended up creating confusion about whether teachers could identify themselves as LGBTQ or have rainbow stickers in classrooms or have a picture up on their desk of their spouse if they're a same-sex couple. That confusion appears to be over. This settlement now clarifies what is allowed in Florida classrooms. So under the terms, the Florida Board of Education will send instructions to every school district saying the Florida law does not prohibit discussing LGBTQ plus people, so they can actually admit that they exist, nor prevent anti-bullying rules on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, or to disallow gay-straight alliance groups. All of that is good. So the settlement also spells out that the law will be neutral, meaning what applies to LGBTQ plus people also applies to heterosexual couples, and that it doesn't apply to library books not being used for instruction in the classroom. Also doesn't apply to books with incidental references to LGBTQ plus characters or same-sex couples, as they are not instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity any more than a math problem asking students to add bushels of apples is instruction on apple farming, according to the settlement. So now both sides are claiming victory on this one, but I do think it's less of a victory for Ron DeSantis than it is for, of course, the plaintiffs. So now the DeSantis administration is calling this a win because of the PR, right? So from day one, they're like, it's not actually don't say gay. It's got nothing to do with saying gay. Well, but it was so vague that people were concerned that, yes, if you actually did talk about, somebody being gay, the teacher being gay or student being gay, that you would get in trouble. And so that's why there was clarification that was needed. But here's Ryan Newman, an attorney for the state of Florida, saying, quote, "We fought hard to ensure this law couldn't be maligned in court as it was in the public arena by the media and large corporate actors." That, of course, being Disney. So Disney got into it with the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis, over this law. So Disney, I don't want to say to their credit, because I don't really think they should get credit for this, because they do a lot of rainbow washing. But they went to war with Ron DeSantis over this. And so for me, let them fight. Let them fight. Okay. Now, that said, he added, this is Newman again, "We are victorious in Florida's classrooms will remain a safe place under the Parental Rights in Education Act." Well, okay, but wait a minute though. How would it, having actual instruction about, the issues facing the LGBTQ plus community, how does disallowing that make children more safe? That doesn't make any sense. The sentence really makes people have the assumption that instructing children about LGBTQ plus people makes them unsafe. And it also further pushes the idea that queer, trans, or non-binary identities are part of a social contagion that you can get simply by learning about them or about it. And no, I don't agree with that either. It also pushes the idea that this is something that was being taught in elementary schools, which is not. It never was. You're not having gender studies classes in grade school. That hasn't happened in the history of grade school. Okay? And under this law, you're not going to have instruction on LGBTQ rights movements. So that's where I don't like this settlement, right? And I'm going to tell you why the reason that I believe that they settled and why I understand it. And ultimately, I'm like, okay, I get this. But what it still does is disallows for the teaching of LGBTQ plus rights movements. And look, that's part of history, right? So for example, Stonewall Inn, pivotal moment in the fight for LGBTQ plus rights. Any history or sociology class looking into important civil rights social movements would have to skip over this. Now, Stonewall Inn happened because of anti-gay laws in New York, right? New York refused to grant licenses to bars that served gay people, which is insanely discriminatory. Now, because gay people were still going to this bar, they allowed police to, that law allowed police to enter Stonewall with a warrant and arrest 13 people for, for serving gay people. That's it. That's it. And of course, afterwards, there ended up being demonstrations, riots. A lot of the people that were there were drag queens, gay men of color, black trans women, all instrumental in the fight for queer liberation. Now, in Florida, because of the content of this, and because of this law, you couldn't have a module on this history. You couldn't teach about Stonewall Inn. This couldn't be part of official instruction. Like, this is this is one of the social movements of the LGBTQ plus community. Again, this should be taught in, I should say, high school history or sociology. But because of the law, they wouldn't be allowed to teach that to high school students. Because remember, this law originally started out with up to about 3rd grade, and then was expanded to all grades. So I wouldn't expect a module like that to teach about Stonewall Inn to a bunch of, 1st graders. No, but I think it's a, important historical context for high schoolers when it comes to a sociology or history class, especially about, again, social movements in the United States, which made up a lot of what happened in the 60s and 70s. And the fact that they can't teach that is ridiculous. And by the way, I grew up at a time where we weren't taught that either. And so I had to find out about these, queer liberation movements and black liberation movements and things like that outside of what was taught in social studies after the fact. And I missed out on a huge part of American history, because that is a big part of our country's history and reality. And so, that said, that's the bad part of this settlement, but the good part is that it protects teachers, it protects LGBTQ plus students, and it does clarify that no, we're not banning rainbows. Okay. Now, in fact, I want to quote Roberta Kaplan, the lead attorney for the plaintiffs. In an interview, she said, "What the settlement does is it reestablishes the fundamental principle that I hope all Americans can agree with, which every kid in this country is entitled to an education at a public school where they feel safe, their dignity is respected, and where their families and parents are welcomed." And so, at the very least, it does do that, but I still think that you're doing kids disservice when you're not teaching the history of some of these, very important, very impactful social movements from, again, a historical perspective and standpoint. Not promoting one or the other, not promoting anything, just telling the history, like this is what gay people had to face. This is what, trans people had to face in order to get some semblance of civil rights. And this is what this country used to do to them. Again, I think that's invaluable, especially as to what is going on today in today's context. So now, that said, she said, quote, "This shouldn't be a controversial thing." And I agree with that. This shouldn't be a controversial thing. Now, getting to why Florida settled. I think that Ron DeSantis realized that his war against woke wasn't doing very well. Yeah. Again, he lost the nomination for, the Republican nomination president because he ran on, I'm going to take on the woke. And once again, most of the American public, including a lot of Republicans, are like, yeah, I don't really care about that. I'm not really interested. So this is not going to endear me to Ron DeSantis, who otherwise is a pretty weird person. Not only that, but he was getting his ass kicked by Disney. Not only that, but there are some issues that are Florida specific that were hurting him as well. For example, Florida's the home insurance market in that state is a complete and utter mess. It's a disaster. So I think what Ron did is like, okay, I'm gonna take the settlement. I'm gonna declare victory. I'm gonna move on to the rest of the dumpster fire that I have turned the state into, and hopefully I can salvage that. Now, why the plaintiffs agreed to settle is because there was a lower court ruling that actually ruled, this was a Tallahassee judge, that said that they lacked standing. So standing is incredibly important if you're bringing a lawsuit. If you don't have standing, you can't bring your suit. So now, after that ruling, the case was appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, but hadn't been ruled on yet, hadn't been taken up yet. So there's a good chance that that lower court ruling could have been upheld and they would have no victory. And so Don't Say Gay would still be vague and broad, and there would be all this uncertainty for teachers and students. So I think Kaplan said, all right, we'll take this small win, and we'll take it. Okay, we're not gonna take what we can get. Kaplan said they believe the appellate court would have reversed the lower court's decision. However, she says that continuing the lawsuit would have delayed any resolution for years. The last thing we wanted for the kids in Florida was more delay. So, look, I don't 100% agree with it, but I can see why they took it. That whole standing issue could have tanked their entire case. Either way, at least there's some sort of win here against Ron DeSantis. And at this point, I'll take whatever wins I can get, even if they are minor.